Good evening. Good evening, Facebook Live. Thank you for joining the Montgomery County Community Review Council as we focus on the historic preservation of St. Luke's and Oddfellows Hall. This session is jointly sponsored by the Christiansburg Institute, Montgomery Museum of Art and History, and the Virginia Tech's Department of History. My name is Heather Nicholson, and I am a member of the Montgomery County Review Council. I'd like to share, before we get started, a report from the New Yorker that reveals only 2% of the 95,000 entries of the National Register of Historic Places to pose a question. Why only 2%? And I'm sure many of us watching Facebook Live and on the video call might have our own answers to that question. But African-American sites, many long destroyed, have been erased from public memory and history. And with that erasure, we are left without a full representation of American history and the communities that are vital, that were vital to its economy, its culture, its political and legal systems. This is why Montgomery County, Virginia is so fortunate, because they have within this very small region 2 sites on the historic registry: the Edgar Long Building in Christiansburg and St. Luke and Oddfellows Hall in Blacksburg. Both of these sites represent a rich history that, when contextualized, tell a broader story of not only our local history, but also our state and national history. And we can move to slide 2. So this evening, we're going to focus squarely on St. Luke's and Oddfellows Hall and why the preservation of this building is so vital. And let's go back to the number. Only 2% of 95,000 entries focus on the African-American experience. So it is really the responsibility of our community to ensure that we preserve the ones that are representative on that list. It is imperative not only to understanding our history, but understanding really who we are today. I am joined by members of the Montgomery County Community Review Council, LaTanya Walker and Christine King. Both are descendants of past holders of the deed of St. Luke and Oddfellows Hall. Chris Sanchez, who is the executive director of the Christiansburg Institute. Jody Booz Daniels, who is the chair of History and Preservation Committee of the Blacksburg Museum and Cultural Foundation. And we are also fortunate to be joined by Brian Towns, who is a historical preservation consultant who worked on the CAP report that we will be learning about today, and Ariel Clark, who also does work in historical preservation. We will focus on the council's mission and objectives, the history, a brief history of Newtown. We're going to spend a lot of time really looking through and talking about the Conservation Assessment Program Survey Report, and then moving on to what does it take for grants and the historic preservation of Black sites. We will leave time for your questions after we highlight some recommendations from our council. And if you do have questions while the presentation is going on, please add them to your chat and we will facilitate Q&A after the session. Thank you very much for joining, and I will pass over to Christine King.
Hello, you guys, welcome. My name is Christine King, and I'm just going to explain to you what and who MCCRC is. The Montgomery County Community Review Council is a collective of community members living in Montgomery County, Virginia, that is committed to promoting equity in our grassroots approach to preserving the diverse history and culture of the county.
Thank you, Christine. So Christine just shared our mission, and I will briefly share the purpose of the session and some objectives that we've lined out for the people. Purpose of the session is to provide open access to information and educate the people, the general public, about the under-preservation and neglect of Oddfellows Hall, a historic African-American building with tremendous cultural significance to Montgomery County. And we firmly believe the Commonwealth of Virginia. We do want to include, it is in fact listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is also listed on the Virginia Landmark Registry. Moving on to the right column of the slide, please note that that is an image of Oddfellows Hall. For those who do not know, this building is located in Blacksburg, Virginia, and there will be more shared about that moving on in the presentation. Objectives we have are to talk about what is historic preservation work and what it might take to reopen Oddfellows Hall as a meaningful asset to the full story of Montgomery County's history. We'll have some members with expertise on our council who will share guidance to museum standard on collections care of artifacts. Many should know there are artifacts that speak directly to Oddfellows Hall that do need to be cared for to standard and professionally. We will also spend some time talking about what is commonly referred to as DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI, the values of our work are very much informed from a grassroots perspective, promoting DEI values and centering directly affected voices closest to the issue. And then we'll talk briefly about community engagement and the many stakeholders who would love to see this site meaningfully preserved and reopened.
All right, hi everyone. I'm just going to give you a little bit of the background. My name is LaTanya Walker. I'll start with the area where Oddfellows is located. Gilbert Vaughn in 1874, he had come to Blacksburg as a slave on the Wade plantation in Christiansburg, Mary Wade. And after emancipation, he purchased the first plot of land and built his home. He purchased the plot of land and built his first home in what would become known as Newtown, a historically segregated African-American neighborhood during Jim Crow. During the late 1800s and into the 1960s, many African-American families migrated to the area to establish a new life in Newtown. Then in 1905, Oddfellows Hall, sorry, just give me 1 second. Switching back and forth. In May 13th, 1905, the leaders of the Tadmor Light Lodge number 6184 of the Grand United Order of Oddfellows purchased a small lot on the corner of Gilbert and Barger Streets for about $95 or $3,300 today. The hall was then constructed through volunteer labor in a Greek classical style. By 1910, their roll showed 23 members. For more than 60 years, the Oddfellows Hall became a central part of Newtown and the larger Black community. They held regular meetings and social gatherings, collected dues, and supported members financially. It also served as a meeting space for the Order of St. Luke, the Busy Bee Society, and the Household of Ruth Lodge, number 5533, the Grand United Order of Oddfellows. And normally that Household of Ruth is known as the women's branch of the Oddfellows, but you could actually join either in Blacksburg at least.
Mm.
1930s, during the Great Depression, the organization, like many other mutual support organizations, coordinated economic support efforts, including insurance and estate management for its members. The group's impact on the Black community is immeasurable. It helped to keep Black Americans on their feet through the Great Depression and the Jim Crow era. They offered loans and grants to community members in need and served as a welcoming space for African Americans. When segregation ended in the late 60s, St. Luke and Oddfellows Hall was no longer as needed. In the 70s, road construction and other development resulted in the decline and disappearance of Newtown as a predominantly African American neighborhood. Nonetheless, Newtown and St. Luke and Oddfellows are important reminders of the resilience, pride, self-reliance, and community spirit of the people who lived in this neighborhood, as well as the segregation, the injustices that segregation imposed. Next slide, please. Okay. Sorry, having a little trouble today. So this slide here, in 2001, in August, the Black members of the community with designated 3 trustees, Beatrice Walker, my grandmother, Aubrey Mills Sr., Christine's great-grandfather, and Walter Lewis as trustees. And through this group, they deeded the land to Montgomery County. Let's see, they deeded the land to Montgomery County.
In 2005.
In 2005. Under this agreement, the building was deeded to the town, but it was deeded under specific conditions. Next slide, please. So these are some of the conditions that that were mentioned in the deeding, in the process. I want to point out, 1, that the building is supposed to be used to educate, collect, preserve, and present the history of Blacksburg's African Americans. 2, the building is not to be moved. 3, the town would preserve, maintain, and restore the building in accordance with accepted historic building standards. And 4, the town would form a subcommittee that includes descendants and members of the Newtown community to maintain and operate the hall.
Thanks, LaTanya. Good evening. My name is Jody Daniels, and I am the Blacksburg Museum Chair of History and Preservation, also member of this grassroots group. I've been asked to shed light on who is responsible for St. Luke and Oddfellows and to explain what is the CAP grant. So what's up with this property, which was deeded in 2005 by the trustees, as LaTanya just mentioned? Well, it's complicated, but I'll try to explain to the best of my knowledge. Look at the left side, the orange half of the graphic, which represents the town's involvement. In simplified language, the town is the landlord. The town holds the deed, which LaTanya explained. The town acquired the land, built the bathroom building, and paid for renovations of the hall between 2004 and 2010. All of this was driven by a grassroots community effort, by the way. Since then, the town provides valuable landlord services and more. Now look at the other side, the blue half of the image. This represents the Blacksburg Museum's role, and in simplified language, the museum is the tenant. The museum's obligations encompass typical museum work, but in this case, the museum does not have to pay for services that most museums must finance. In a nutshell, the museum is responsible for education, fundraising, staffing, exhibits, community work concerning St. Luke and Oddfellows, and I want to add, tending to the preservation of the building. Moving on, one of the conditions, as LaTanya mentioned, in the deed was to create an advisory committee of the community. The trustees' intention was clear. This means African American leadership. The 5-year town and museum operation agreement comes due next month in August. It is an important document as it outlines the obligations of each entity. Under the last agreement, the town gifted the museum over $112,000 per year, which was about half the museum's expenditure for 2018. This does not include the value of service the town provides, which is significant. No other nonprofit in the area enjoys this consistent funding perk. Lastly, the museum entered into a rental agreement with the town, which is good until 2037. Next slide, please. So switching directions, last summer, Kate Skelly, the previous executive director, applied for a Conservation Assessment Program grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences. This is a grant which provides two professionals, one with expertise in building and building services and the other in collections. We're fortunate to have Brian Towns with us today, who assessed the buildings and associate services. As a side note, what do I mean by collections? Specifically, the stuff that is usually donated to museums, which includes artifacts, physical or digital. Ideally, the collection has historical, educational, or social significance and fits the Institute's mission. Blacksburg Museum is fortunate to hold many valuable artifacts from the local Black community. Back to the CAP grant. This is a valuable tool to use for long-range planning, fundraising, public engagement, most importantly, applying for future grants. Next slide, please. So this is where we are in time. This is the town and museum are hopefully evaluating the port. The purple recommendations are divided into 3 groups, all based on priorities. By the way, these recommendations all stem from the CAP report. The immediate, the short term, and long term. For example, security of the hall is an immediate issue, whereas how to better use the accessory building is a long-term endeavor. Unique to this program is in 1 year, the museum will contact the CAP assessors to discuss what has been addressed and talk about successes and challenges. How the town and museum address the CAP recommendations impacts museum's future grant-making potential. So I will pass it on to the next person. Thank you.
And so before Brian and Ariel, and thank you, Jody, that's actually all really obviously important information. It's very dense information, and Jody does a very good job explaining it. For those of you who are not from the area, just to quickly point out, the building we're talking about is Oddfellows Hall, right by Wendy's on North Main Street in Blacksburg, okay? So if you're not a local, if you're not a townie, and you're like, what are we talking about here? We are talking about that really beautiful wood frame structure right there on North Main Street, right next to Wendy's, which itself is tremendous in its history. I'm going to share a little bit about grant making and the historic preservation of Black sites. There are lots of funds to preserve sites just like this. In fact, we're seeing an increase in trend in grant making from foundations, state, federal, government entities who are creating grant programs specifically designed to meaningfully preserve and steward African-American sites of cultural significance. And so Blacksburg, right here in Montgomery County, has a tremendously rich cultural asset in its backyard. And we are a group of people who have, as MCCRC, who have robust interest in authenticity and preserving this site, and can provide guidance on how to do that equitably, The preservation of African-American sites is a strong social component of how we actually go about talking about the history and telling and sharing the history, and who gets to do that. And that's really key in a successful grant, making sure that you've got representation of the people who are directly impacted by what we would call contested history, the African American community in Montgomery County, more specifically in Newtown, in Blacksburg. And so the town of Blacksburg and the Blacksburg Museum and Cultural Foundation are in a unique position to take advantage of a lot of opportunities that would bring increased stewardship to this site. And we would like to support that as a group, and are really excited to hear that there will hopefully be some forward progress here. And MCCRC is on the standby as a grassroots organization, willing and ready to support that effort here locally. Next, I'm going to move over to the next slide. And this is where Brian and Ariel will together probably get into some more of the granular details of some of the highlights in the CAP report. So I'll step back, and then Brian, it's all you.
Great, thank you very much. So this is the first floor of the Oddfellows Hall, St. Luke's, and just to kind of go over the CAP report real quick, it's as Jody had on her slides, it's a 2-day site visit in which the assessors look at all parts of the building, at least everything that's accessible, including the interior, exterior, building systems, which includes heating and cooling, electrical, security systems. Then look at the exterior envelope of the building, where we look at windows and siding and roofs and chimneys and that kind of thing. So all with an eye toward finding areas that may need attention. Everything is geared toward extending the life of the building and preserving the historic structure to the best in the best way possible. And so what we have here is the first floor of Oddfellows Hall. And you can see it's just, the building is almost completely unchanged from the time that it was built back in 1905, which is in itself, with any building, is an extremely rare and unusual condition to have, where you have this much original fabric surviving. Of course, it's seen some hard use over the years, from the time that it was a wood shop and used as storage from about the 1960s up until around 2000, I believe. But the main portions of the building survive: the windows, the floors, the stage at the end, the wood ceilings. One of the things that Jody touched on when she was talking about the report is that it's broken up into different categories of recommendations: immediate, short-term, and long-term. And for example, in this building, some of the immediate recommendations are to improve the security of the building, as well as to provide some kind of a smoke alarm system, fire alarm system, and also to provide, along with the security and the locks and things, some kind of a security system, whether it be cameras or motion sensors, that kind of thing. And then looking at the long-term goals for the building, really the major one for this property is a historic structure report, in my opinion. A historic structure report is a very detailed report on a building that gets in-depth research done into not only the building itself, the physicality of the building, but also the social history of the building. So I think this is an example of where a document like this would be extremely important to have, especially where it's involving recording oral histories and memories of people who knew the building when it was being used for its original purpose. So for example, some of the other things that we looked at in this building, the flooring system is questionable. One of the things that we did recommend is that we have a structural engineer come in to evaluate the framing on the floor, just to determine its stability, its strength, whether there is reinforcement that's needed to happen. Another thing that we were looking at was upgrading the electrical system, getting more historically appropriate light fixtures. The building right now is only conditioned on the first floor, meaning that there's no heating and cooling on the second floor. And none of these systems have any kind of humidity control, which is very important when you have a museum building that may have original artifacts, collections, that kind of thing in it. So, the work that was done on the building back in the previous rehabilitation, which I think Jody said happened between 2004 and 2010, did a good job in buttoning up the building for now, but there's more to do, I think, in my opinion. And I think that there are other studies that need to be done. The historic structure report will look at things like paint analysis to determine what original paint colors might have been. It'll look at exterior features that are missing. For example, the shutters that were on the building, the hinges still remain on the outside of the windows. And so, what were those original features? Did they come along later? That kind of thing. So the building did have some evolution over time. So we want to be able to be sure that that's recorded and there is some record of that. As far as the details of the construction work, I know we do have Ariel here. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ariel Clark. I'm just sort of here consulting with Southwest Restoration. So in this building, and I sort of want to echo Brian, the importance of this report that Brian created. Reporting like this and subsequent, HAB style reporting, which would include physical documentation of, what the details are and what the structure itself looks like, how it was built, how it was constructed, as well as the sort of the social use of the building. All of this data informs the planning that that goes into the preservation of the original material, the restoration of the interior and exterior to mirror, the time periods that are appropriate. As far as adaptive reuse and concerns of engineering, yes, absolutely. An engineer's report is going to be of critical value to this building, to the use of this building. And a structures conditions report is absolutely an imperative. I think diagnosing, where weatherproofing, weather tightness is an issue is critical. I mean, to Brian's point, the conservation of the collection relies on the maintenance of this building, the storage facility of these really important artifacts. I think, obviously it's the responsibility of, the holders to maintain this building for all the reasons listed and for, getting it stabilized for next steps in planning.
And I think one of the things that Ariel will be looking at, when you're working on a historic building like this, is you want to be very careful in balancing when you're looking at deteriorated features, what you repair and what you replace. So that's when you get the expertise of someone like Ariel, who works with historic buildings like this to determine what's too far gone, what are the primary artifacts or the primary materials that need to be preserved, and what are the more secondary things that are maybe not as special and can be replaced with new to return the building to an appearance that is in line with its original character. This was a finished building. It wasn't a barn. It wasn't a rustic building. This was something that was a centerpiece of the community, and it makes sense that the work that was put into this building was the best that these folks could afford and could do. So obviously it was built with a lot of love and a lot of care, and that's what needs to shine through in any kind of treatment that happens to the building down the road.
Yeah, and just sort of on that same level, I think when it comes to the technical elements, finding partners who will be, taking appropriate care to meet the statutes that relate to, and guidelines for the treatment of these structures, and completing things correctly with appropriate materials, because doing it incorrectly will absolutely shorten the lifespan of the building. And that's why inappropriate materials, inappropriate design, would really ultimately harm this building.
Yes, I think to touch on that exactly, Ariel, I think one of the things that I'm very careful to recommend in the reports is that when you're looking at things like installing new electrical systems, installing new heating and cooling systems, is that you look at contractors that have proven experience in working with buildings like this, so that things are done not only in character, but are done very sensitively, so that we're not negatively impacting the historic fabric of the building, and also not doing anything that's going to alter its historic character. This was one of the things that comes under the broad security heading of the building. These are a great set of most likely original front doors that just need some repair. You know, they're items that are probably original to the building. You know, they're over 100 years old now, and so of course any kind of a painted wood element that's exposed to the weather for all that time on the exterior is going to require some work. So we want to make sure that these doors are addressed and can be secure for another 130 years.
And I would say that when we're talking about these things, like security is as imperative to the conservation, preservation, and restoration efforts that we have ahead. It might seem like a no-brainer, it might seem odd to suggest like security cameras and or just more substantive security measures, but I would absolutely say, given the climate, the value of this structure, then yeah, that's in the immediate time frame.
And so I think at this point, big thank you to Brian and Ariel for sharing not only their time, but clearly their passion and expertise into this important effort. Christine King is going to share more about some of the recommendations outlined in the CAP report, and then I believe we will move into a Q&A. So I will just go ahead and step back, and then Christine King will share some highlight recommendations.
Hello again. So some of the CAP recommendations in the immediate section would be to secure the windows and doors with locks and cameras, install a fire system, retain a plaster conservator, install temporary hand railings. Moving on to the short-term recommendations, looks like institute a maintenance and repair plan, an exterior repair and paint schedule, repair wood deterioration, and inspect the chimney. And for the long-term recommendations following the CAP report would be to engage a structural engineer, repair the shutters, prepare a historic structure report for the building to include a comprehensive history of the building, HAB's quality, architectural drawings of the existing condition plan. Next slide, please. And for preservation, we would like for following recommendations in the CAP report to secure a deed of the gift of easement, elevate the level of significance to statewide on National Register of the Historic Places. Cultural competency is huge when it comes to the preservation and restoration of this building. We would like to secure a professional curator and a site conservator with expertise with African American heritage sites. We would love grant readiness. So to seek someone professional, board development assistance to address grant readiness in regards to a nationally registered historic African American site, and museum education. So that way Oddfellows Hall is accessible to the public. It's an education of local and state history, and also to contextualize the site with American history. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat and we will follow up with those.
I'd like to make a special acknowledgement to Brian and Ariel for joining our call. The CAP report has provided a wealth of information for our council to begin to understand how we can participate and get involved in securing the preservation of St. Luke's and Oddfellows. And we understand why it's so significant. Blacksburg honors the historic district, the 16 squares, I believe, as well as the founders of the town with the Alexander Black House. And I think it is equally important to recognize, honor, and value the African-American community that has been a part of this land and this community since its founding, working on plantations, and then after emancipation as wage earners, moving through their training to become business owners. So St. Luke's and Oddfellows Hall really represent the community of African Americans that lived there before and after emancipation through today. And it's important for all members of our community to recognize it and to participate in that history. Chris was mentioning the contributions of African Americans in Oddfellows as well as St. Luke's Order. So when you look at St. Luke's and Oddfellows Halls, I want you to remember the pennies, the nickels, the dimes, the quarters that cooperatively came together through the joint stock organization to build and to found this hall. And the fact that Christine and LaTanya could stand in front of ancestral land is significant. Ancestral structures is significant. And as much as it is significant to the descendants and members of the community who remember socializing in that hall, it also is important and representative of African American history throughout this country. So I hope that all of you will participate in this conversation and have dialogues with the museum and the town of Blacksburg about how important and vital this structure is to our local and our state history. We thank you for coming. We hope to have other educational seminars on various topics, and we will keep you informed through our Facebook page.